Hey everybody. There's no one here yet, but I'm gonna go ahead and get started so that I don't, mostly so I don't have to edit this at all before I post it on YouTube. Okay, so today, hi, I'm Krista, and this is my little live stream deal that I started doing. It's called lēmniscāta Live. The lēmniscāta is an ancient symbol of sort of the infinity symbol, and it sort of relates to polarity and how polarity, different poles need each other, and how we journey, between them, and that in that middle point that there's like thresholds there, and of going from one pole to the other, like taking another's perspective when you're kind of polarized in one side, and how you have to cross the threshold that you need to cross in order to take the other side. And that's sort of my concept too of mothering, in the terms of like the other, the M, and then the parentheses othering. It's something that sort of dawned on me a couple years ago, when I was in a training, and we were doing gestures, like working with gestures, and this gesture came up, and this idea of mothering as an archetype for how to repair this this rupture of othering, and also the absolute necessity of othering, and how othering is just part of being embodied in the world. Hey, Michelle and Kara, thanks for coming. Any of you who come late, you can always, hi, oh, my stepmom is here. Hi, Barb. Oh my gosh, that means so much. I'm gonna cry. Kisses to you and to Dad. Okay, so yes, this is the idea of the other, and how problematic it can be to other people, but also how just a reality it is, that we are embodied, and we have this sort of like threshold, this physical threshold between ourselves and another person, and our psychic thresholds of what we consider our own mind, and our responsibility to carry our own mind as well, not just something to be transcended or something, I guess. It's both. So yeah, so that's a little bit about lēmniscāta, and about I don't know, that sort of led into the mothering. And so so this idea of othering, like this, the gesture of mothering, and the embodied, the female embodied person having being sort of an archetype for how we can remember this traversing of otherness, because there's a gap, and it has to do with this threshold in the middle of the lēmniscāta. And so the lēmniscāta is sort of how I'm working with, of course, the female and the male are a polarity, and duality is an ancient indigenous metaphysical understanding. It's an epistemological practice that we have to remember to cross threshold into other, and to keep our system in rhythm in this oscillating dualism of the world. So I forgot what I was saying. Anyway, so today, I'll just move on, about the lēmniscāta, and then these thresholds, and that this is really is what I think that has sort of been lost, and it's central in my work. So that's why the mystery school that I am starting, I guess, is called lēmniscāta. And I was saying the male body has its own, that's a polarity, and we need to also traverse that otherness. This is like kind of a practice and a responsibility, and also a reality, that we have male and female, masculine and feminine in us as well. So, however, the embodied female body, and these are ancestral teachings. I don't even say ancestral. These are indigenous teachings that I received over my lifetime. I guess the ones I'm thinking about now were sort of like in my coming of age time, or my adolescence. That so I'm focusing on kind of recovering, lifting up that pole that's sort of gotten dropped, is the female, the female body, and how it can help us remember, help us to have the courage and the strength and the just resilience to be crossing that threshold all the time. So that's kind of like what lēmniscāta is about. And today's topic is called permission. And then we're going to talk about verbal, energetic, somatic, cosmic, and ancestral permission. Of course, there are more permissions than that, but this is just a start. I'm a little bit off the cuffish. Excuse me. So I guess I want to talk about permission and why I'm even bringing this up. And just sort of like name some of the baggage that it carries. Hey everyone, I just want to say hi. There's a bunch of people here now, so thanks for coming. I really appreciate the support that you're giving me by coming here live. And in a post I was talking about recently about like the layers of support that we need to like come forward, supported in the world. So thank you, all of you, for being here to help me be my best self. So we're talking about permission, and I was born in Seattle, Washington, and I grew up under the arc of of school and the Western paradigm and all that demanded, and a sort of authoritarian understanding of permission. Now I want to one of my projects is about repair, not like continuing to deepen the rupture and the polarization between the Western and indigenous paradigms. So when I say that, just know that that's where I'm coming from. But there is but sort of when you get stuck in one side or the other, then it gets, I hate to use the word, but kind of perverted. Not in a sexual way, but just in how any shape, if it's has pressure on it in a weird way, like a circle, it will get distorted. Let's use distorted, it's probably better. Okay, so I one of the ways that I grew up with permission is this idea that you had to ask an authority figure, and the authority figure it had certain cultural parameters, but it wasn't really about someone being a knowledge keeper or a wisdom holder, or someone that was deeply trustworthy in an intergenerational community or clan or tribe. So a lot of people, when they hear permission, like this is really central in this whole talk is central in the issue of cultural appropriation versus appreciation, or maybe appreciation. I mean, let's just say the conversation about cultural appropriation and how we can understand permission, but also in healing, and how in healing, but also in cultural restoration, and how we, what are the permissions that we need in restoring our own culture from within ourselves, and also in these various dimensions. So something, I was attending a thing with Ray Castellino many years ago. I was pregnant with my second baby, my Shoko. And I was terrified. So I was desperate to have a difference between my first and second birth, which I've talked about in previous platicas. So, but I was in this thing, and it really did help me and set me forward in a certain strand of my learning. But one of the things he said was, he had all of these kind of like, community agreements, but they were just sort of like principles that were written for our group, to hold our group. And one of them was, I don't even know if it was one of the principles but it was something that he talked about. He talked about that you never have, and this is partly, I want to honor my teacher in a way and mentor, but also acknowledge that I may have changed it a little bit. So honoring him, but also acknowledging that this might not be his exact teaching. But he talked about that we don't have a right to give people information. So one of the practices he had in his facilitation was to always ask people, if something occurred to him, like an idea, to ask permission to get, like, do they want that information? Because it sort of reminds me of another teacher of mine, Wapio. She does the matrona, and she works in the area of undisturbed birth. But anyway, she talks about, oh no, I forgot where I was going with that. Okay, it may come back to me, but okay, so this idea of permission and not having the right to ask for, or to just offer information. Oh, I know, Wapio talks about like respecting people's like right and need and obligation to find their own way. And that it's always, oh gosh, what's her name? Insu Kim Berg. I might be saying those names wrong, but she also talks about how disrespectful it is to decide in yourself that someone else needs healing, really to decide anything for anyone else. So without permission. So this is, these are kind of two it's sort of like if these actually went hand in hand, where you asked an authority or expert or mentor for permission to use their work, or but they also asked you before offering you their wisdom, because there is something that's really true about the need to grapple oneself. So this is kind of like an introduction to this problem of permission. And one more piece is about cultural appropriation or cultural restoration. And one of the things in the Indígena project that really, which is another little thing that I do, and you can see it, you can look at it on my website if you want, there's a link there. But it has to do with cultural restoration. That the idea of permission is such a charged thing for people who have grown up under colonization, because there's a kind of gagging that's happened, and because so many things were made illegal and punishable, that people there's a kind of inherited gagging that, and Gloria Anzaldúa talks about this, like inheritance of the gagged Indian woman, and how we have to like grapple with, am I being gagged, or is this an actual like ancestral withholding of permission? Because permission, okay, so let's talk about permission. So that's a long introduction. I'm just giving up. These are just going to be long. But okay, so this is just kind of like a stab and a start. But so so there's lots of levels of permission. So so for example, just the other day I was in the car with my daughter and her friend, and they were thinking, I had suggested that they invite a third friend to come do this project, and or a couple other friends, and she said, I asked her friend what she thought, because I'd asked my daughter, and my daughter was not sure. And so I think we were just all tired or whatever. But then I asked this other friend what she thought, and she said, I kind of brought it up out of the blue after it'd been a while since last talking about it. And she said, I don't know if I can imitate it or whatever, but she said, yeah, I think that would be good. And I wasn't looking at her because she was behind me in the car, but so this is like getting into like verbal versus any of these other kinds of permission. But like really you have, I mean, you have to, verbal is just one layer, and really, really often people who have been conditioned and domesticated or just raised into agreeableness will give verbal permission, but these other levels, and I'm just calling this energetic because I couldn't even see her, so I don't know what her body language was. And maybe it was even verbal still because there was just something in her voice, but I felt this energy and I just listened to it and I said, oh, you know, it sounds like I heard you say the words this, but like your tone, I kind of felt like it was something else, or I get this feeling that, and she said, and I can't remember what she said, but it was sort of, you know, she was like, yeah, you know, so, and it's another thing with children, asking permission, is, you know, if you're asking permission, like, will you please be quiet? Will you please be quiet? Like, it's better to just say, be quiet. Maybe, you know, like having integrity in our own words and what we say, and that it's okay to give an order sometimes, even, and this goes back to that, we need to, the most important thing to know how to do is to make repair, because anyway, that gets complicated. I'm going to talk about that another time. But okay, so there's verbal versus sort of like a feeling, like, oh, I'm not sure if I really felt a yes. But often people will just go with the verbal. And so, for example, like I work with clients all the time, and I can always tell. I was thinking, you know, I can think of many times where I'm working with someone and they said that they definitely want to do the work, and they even seem maybe even enthusiastic. But then as we're starting to do it, I can see subtle, so that we're going to go now into somatic permission, that there's like subtle things that will happen, like, you know, start tensing their hands and say, okay, but, you know, and then often if I even give the slightest bit of space for them to say no, then, or just acknowledge that, like, I mean, usually I have to be careful because we're so trained to never say no, that if I even suggest that they're maybe saying no, often people feel accused of being difficult or something. So I have to, often I have to give the little piece ahead of time of like, we're really trained to, you know, and I just want to make sure that this is totally in your best interest, and that every level of you. Often it's when, you know, a partner sends their partner to come, where they may, sorry, it's my dog barking. Dogo, come here. Can you be quiet, love? Just a second. Can you take her out? Is that okay? So I just asked her and she said yes. But who knows if she really wanted to. But she knows she can't say no. So this is an interesting thing with parenting, anyway, with mothering. So, okay. So one example of this somatic thing was I was at another training. I'm really like learning things. Anyway, I was at another training, and okay, so this is actually, you may have heard of process work. I honestly don't. I'm naming it because this is a thing that I took from that training. I don't take everything from process work. Let's just leave it at that. But this one piece is really interesting. In process work, they have this thing they call a double signal. When you say one thing, but everything is just speaking something else. Like in this one instance, this woman was saying that she's, you know, it's just a very simple thing, like in the middle demo, and the woman was saying how glad she was to be here, and then she's just so looking forward to having an exchange. And an exchange would have been like, so, and she was, she's just having like kind of spontaneous hand motions, but her hand motions weren't like this. which is an exchange or some kind of variation on that. It was like this. So it was sort of really, she was, I mean, you could see it kind of negatively and say really she just wanted to take, but really, you know, it's like it was a deep expression of need to receive. So I don't know. So this is just kind of, and these gestures, I work a lot with gestures. This is part of how we restore ceremony, because the gestures that emerge are often archetypal and can be amplified to, in certain ways, to remember, to like remember from fragments to larger gestures that let's just say, this is another whole topic, but let's just say are authentically ceremonial or healing or something like that. I have to write that down. I should talk about that. Okay. So that's sort of somatic, like looking at someone's body, and like, and often it'll be in the hands that, you know, that, and the gestures that you can tell that someone's really saying no. And it's really important. Like this is partly like when in training people who are going to go out and do this work out into the world, but it also just is about when you're talking to your children and like you're in your children, your partner, your family, your community, that these are things that you can keep in mind, because we're also like whatever practitioners, we're healers as mothers. Okay, it's like our job, right? That's Earth, Mother Earth is our model, and as healers, we need to listen and pay attention. So does that make sense? I think. Let me know if you have questions. Just, I'm kind of watching. Okay, so then there's two more kinds of permission that I'm going to talk about right now that go beyond like the individual, because like a person might say yes, and they may really want the healing actually, but then sometimes there are other things in place that we need to begin to recover our ability to feel into. Sort of like, you know, there's like been like a plant medicine resurgence on the level of communicating with plants in, you know, even like within kind of some subculture at least. Whereas when I first came across that kind of idea, I was, you know, spoken from someone. I was probably 19, and I was with a wisdom keeper from La Push, a Quileute man, and he just talked about his work or his obligation as a plant talker tour. You know, just that he's like, I talk to plants. And of course he didn't mean like in English or in Quileute or anything, but just that anyway, that's also another one. But anyway, but sort of like this idea that there are other say relatives that we have to turn to, and how to do that in a way that's really embodied and not just intellectual. So that's the challenge. Okay, so we'll do this together, and that's part of the project of the lēmniscāta program too, or the whatever I call it, the school or whatever you want to call it. So okay, so next I'm going to talk about cosmic permission, and I'm going to start out with something really really pretty simple, and that is cosmic being like just like the phases of the moon, right? And there's lots of, this is also really prominent now and of course, in the 70s, the 80s, there's huge, resurgence of astrological knowledge kind of in mainstream culture, and the 1970s and 80s. But so it's not like this new wave is the first, or even that it was in the 70s or 80s. This is ancient wisdom, but sort of there is a kind of brand of it that's kind of neo whatever, where just really thinking about the building of the moon and the waning of the moon, and energetically how that affects healing different things. And I'm probably not making a call here to like figure out the moon phases and to think about them, but to just always know that whenever you're always working within a cosmic reality, you're always working within pressures and rhythms and pulls from the cosmic world. Also, the natural, like the land. I could say also the earth, earth permission. So there's many. These are not all of them. But I think as we start attuning to, even like starting to attune to the somatic and just the simple double signal between verbal and somatic, we start opening our ability to receive no's that we might have missed before. And that's just respectful. And it, not only to ourselves, or not only to our, like the other that we're maybe sitting with, but also for ourselves and our ancestors. Okay, so another one is like Mercury retrograde. I was just reading a really interesting post on Facebook by someone who was saying, oh, I'm really coming to love Mercury retrograde. Like it's more my, I don't know, I can't remember how she put it, but but it was really interesting to me. It's kind of like being at ease in the underworld, or and that's kind of really my reality, is that it's often hard to hey Sherry, see ya. It's often hard to be in it at the time, and it's really painful, but that's part of the ease, is allowing yourself to also be in, to even get to that point of deep pain, and to cycle back around. So so it's not, so again, we're talking about polarity, duality, and this like indigenous practice, it for sure in Mesoamerican tradition, the Nawa tradition, embodied in the idea of Ometeot, or the twin god of Omoteot, who is male and female, not some merged like combination of male and female, but being both, embodying the duality. And everything is talked about in duality, like hot and cold, winter and summer, day and night, that these are things and thresholds, that it's just how it is. And this is how our nervous systems, it's how our breath, it's how our heart, it's how our sleeping and waking, it's just what is. So not a good, bad, better, or anything. So one side of any polarity isn't good or bad. But that our ability to traverse both sides, that some people, in general, people are, it sounds really reductionist or something, but some, people are of two kinds, kind of, but it's another duality. They either tend to be able to traverse the underworld, which is like they're able to go there, but it can also be kind of a suck, and it can be kind of a dark reality, or they're kind of more stuck in this sort of sunny light, like love and light. It's sort of like the spiritual bypass. And the other side now, I've sort of like started talking about it as like the political bypass. We can bypass like having to traverse threshold to taking the perspective of the other, because we are just because of all the fragmentation and polarization in our world, our nervous systems aren't really functioning, because all the ceremonies have been taken away. And that's sort of, I guess, ends up being what my the point of my existence is about restoring these ceremonies so we can have integrity and rhythm again in our bodies and in our relationships, and honor those in the natural world and have them resonate with us such that we have support out there, you know. And then, you know, actually there's this great, like if you think about prayer as kind of something that, I mean, it's not quite the same as permission, but it's similar in this way of the way it's used. Like, I'm going to ask for something and God is going to say yes or no and give it to me or not. And then you could use creator, you can use this manifestation, abundance stuff. All of these are like, you think of that as just prayer, as a like an asking for permission. And the permission is a yes if you get the thing or whatever. But another perspective on prayer is really more about prayer being the thing that you do in order to arrange your own being, body, psyche, relationships, relationality, how you can, you know, kind of realign yourself through. I mean, really, it's like kind of almost like sound healing or something, even though I don't know much about that. But that words have frequencies and they land on they affect your system. So whatever you say will affect your system, hopefully such that you can align yourself, I don't know, with the Tao's, or, you know, so that it's more the really thing that you do is to prepare yourself such that you see what's coming for you and you are ready to embrace it and to, you know, take, you know, so this is kind of like the way permission works too, is like, what is it that and it's kind of like this idea, it's a family constellation idea of like love flowing, like what needs to happen so that love can flow, not who's right or wrong, although that does come up because victim and guilt and innocence is something we all carry. No one escapes. And if you think you've escaped, then you're kidding yourself. You don't want to escape. That's not the goal. The goal is to be able to carry them both, because that's just putting one step in front of the other, is guilt and innocence, guilt and innocence. Okay, so yeah, okay, so there, cosmic, and then kind of like a shout out to like and there's more than just cosmic permission. And then, okay, so now we're going to step into ancestral permission a little bit. And so my first introduction to family constellation was probably 10 years ago. And then immediately I was like, whoa, it resonates with something in my in my lineage, in my body, in my calling, in my, you know, all kinds of things. And so I ended up training. I think I did 2 facilitator trainings. My first one was, I don't know, 4 years ago, and then I did another one a couple of years ago. Anyway, so so one of the things, like when I trained in family constellation, like what I apprehended that was going on is not always what was being taught. Like I was taught that the patterns that we're drawing on in that modality or process is about like helping. It's just like, it's like symbolic helping of the psyche to heal. So symbols help. Whereas this was like one of, I'm not going to think of the name of the author right now, but there's this great native thinker, philosopher. I'm like, is it Vine Deloria or is it someone else? If you want to know, PM me and I'll tell you. But who talks about like that part of where native philosophy or ontology or whatever got misunderstood is around this idea of symbol, that like something is symbolizing something else, but he's saying, no, it is, right? So this is how I took family constellation. Like they talk about like setting up lineages in order to do healing work, but they don't, at least my trainers didn't talk about, like I was sort of trying to ask questions all the time about ancestors and about permission, like when the ancestors, how do you know if the ancestors are saying yes? And they just couldn't understand me. Basically, let's put it that way. So after a while, I just sort of shut up and was like, oh, okay, this is, now I just heard there's like an ancestral healing, there's some sort of summit or something, and there's at least someone from Family Constellation who maybe does take ancestors literally. And certainly my favorite teacher, Francesca Mason-Boring, who wrote a book that we'll be talking about in the lēmniscāta mystery school. She definitely, it's ancestors. So I did the training with someone else just because of timing, but she's like really my family constellation mentor and trainer through her books and how I relate that to the pieces I was given other places. But so in family, so ancestral, right? Ancestral permission. Because what if you just wanting to heal something isn't enough? What if the ancestors, for whatever reason, from the others, across the veil, they have more information and they're like, no, or you're still kind of not completely in integrity. And I don't mean like you're lying, but like there's still something that's coming together for you so that you can fully do that work. Or sometimes it can be the facilitator. The facilitator isn't able to handle whatever there is ancestrally. This comes up a lot where, like, say there's a murder, a rape, abortion, these sort of, whatever, quote unquote, dark things that right now in our culture people are so taboo. Sometimes they come up and the actual facilitator can't handle it, and then the ancestors are like, nope. And that will often show up like in the process where, like, because in family constellation we use representatives to tap into somatic pattern and archetypal patterns, meaning people stand in for different ancestors and for the person who's actually sort of the center, the one who's bringing the issue or the healing. And so often, like the whoever's representing whatever in this, whatever the lineup is, that they won't be able to like get cloudy or foggy, and sometimes that has to do with other things. So we have to sort of see what actually is going on, and I can't. It's not blanket. It's very particular in depending on what, like, the exact thing we're doing on that. But like a representative not being able to remember things or know what to say or repeat what you're saying, or because we offer, like, there's this thing, it's like called sentences, and it's kind of like medicine. It's like these little medicinal phrases that about speaking just what is, that are so mending, that get out of this like you, that are just like what is, but they're very powerful utterances. But sometimes, like, or sometimes a rep will just be like, I just can't say it. And I've been in constellations where in the end, the facilitator, and I'm trying to be, I need to be careful about this, how I say it, because to honor this facilitator and my permissions with her, but also and the people, etc. But something like, it wasn't going anywhere. It wasn't going anywhere. And then the facilitator came out and said, oh, wait, this is not between these people. It's systemic, basically, is what she said. So whether it was race, class, whatever it was, she named something, and she, picked up a blanket and put it over the person who couldn't. So that's I don't know if that's giving an example of ancestral, but it's giving an example of how that might show up. Where something's not moving, in that case, it was that, and she could have maybe done work on that, like on that systemic issue, but she didn't. Why she didn't, I don't know. Could have been time. It could have been her somatic part. Ultimately, you just sort of you develop your own intuition about things, and you start being able to just I know. Oh, this is that. This is that. But that idea that someone just like that you can't get things to resolve. And so this is like, I don't know. I'm just trying to explain that there is one way is like an ancestor knows the facilitator can't handle it, and they would say no. That's one reason why an ancestor would block the work. And you know that the thing they say is that you can only take someone else as far as you yourself is gone. You can only expect a partner or a friend or a client or whatever to delve into. If you're afraid of it, you're shutting them down. And that's something Wapio also talked about. She would have this thing where she would say, if you're, you know, in terms of midwifery, which is all kinds of complicated, because she doesn't really teach midwifery in a way, but this idea, at least, that, and I think maybe she got it from Michel Audin or something, but that this idea is like, if something is going wrong, you need to ask yourself, how are you creating that in the room with your own energetic, you know, kind of interface with the space. And not to say it's always the facilitator. It's just one example that I thought of for today. Let me see if there's something else. I mean, sometimes the facilitator is totally fine with and has done many pieces with murder or rape or these sort of difficult things, because they come up in constellation. That's where the ruptures are back there, and that's the things that we need to, you know, bring out and address with these utterances and with the archetype, reforming the archetypal patterns and what somatically that emerges out of that. And so if, for example, the group who's holding the space in the room can't handle it, then that's another time that an ancestor might put the, you know, brakes on. And a facilitator will just feel that, like, for whatever reason, I just feel like I can't go forward. And so it's a tricky balance. You have people coming to you who want healing. And so to say, oh, well, I don't feel there's permission is hard. Okay, but I want to go back to something sort of wrapping up this part. Has to do with permission. Oh no, I may be spacing it out, but we'll see if it comes back to me. Okay, so basically, just do a recap, and maybe it will come back to me then. We're talking about getting permission. Oh, I know what I was maybe going to talk about. It was in the first Indígena Project circle that we did a constellation around permission, where permission was the thing that we were working with. Sort of like, so it was kind of, and it had to do with a systemic reality around that, you know, that do I not have ancestral permission, or am I feeling gagged? And what's the difference, and how do I know? And so we did a constellation. I mean, this was my perspective in facilitating it, is that around healing this structural reality of permission for Indigenous, especially mothers, birth keepers, to restore and recover and enact their own cultural traditions. And so by doing the ceremony, opening up space for, opening up the way for people to actually find their specific, I work a lot with adoptees, people who really, the place, you know, who are really in a place of exile, you know, sealed adoptions, etc., things like that. Okay, so I guess what I'm saying is this idea of permission, and when you have permission, and you know, I heard someone say once, and I may even have talked about this in the past, I don't know, but some Facebook thing, right? And I got so upset, and I had to like almost leave Facebook. You know, took me up months to get, years probably get over it. But I heard this person say, who's whatever, say that if, you know, about cultural appropriation and how horrible it is, and they said, you know, if you think this was their litmus test, if you think you might be appropriating, then you probably are. And so in saying that, they're basically saying, and if you aren't worried about it, then you're probably good, right? Whereas I have the absolute opposite perspective, in that it's like, if you're thinking, oh, man, you know, you read, like, narcissism is the big thing right now. So if you, like, you read the descriptions and you're like, shit, am I a narcissist? You're probably not. If you're worried you might be a narcissist, you probably aren't, okay? It's the people who, like, are sure they're not. That's like the definitions of narcissism, right? So, like, having the humility to worry that you might be assuming permission when you don't have it, either community-wise or ancestrally, is to me more of a sign of integrity, that you have permission, or that at least you can trust yourself to, like, take a step forward and then start feeling when, you know, and that sometimes is the gagging thing, not the actual limitation. So yeah, so this idea of permission is something that's so foreign in terms of its, like, the scope I'm talking about, in, like, say, most of the world, in terms of, you know, first world or dominant culture, or and it's something that we need to take a step back and, like, just, you know, remember a little bit, and bring in some more layers of how we are interfacing with people and traversing that gap to the other, and crossing these thresholds. Let's see. So yeah, and I'm not even sure why I wanted to talk about this. I think it has to do with, like, maybe the last thing I was doing had to do with the knowing field, and I was giving, like, kind of criteria for, like, how you know you are or aren't. Like, it kind of was about, how do you know if you do or don't have permission? And some of the criteria were, I think, had some of this stuff as underpinnings, and it's always a tricky balance of, like, you know, every time you assert anything that is true, it's like, you cast a shadow. It's like life or teaching or whatever. It's all about, like, catching the next shadow that you're casting. So I'm sure that probably today I cast some shadows, and if you pick one up, let me know, and that gives me something to talk about next time. So yeah, so I'm also, just to let you know, I'm going to be doing these live streams. I'm going to do one every day through Friday, partly because I am initiating this, like, 1-year program that, I mean, really at the heart of it is that I want to have a group where our mission is to work in these realms of permission and trauma resolution, and the ways in how these are related to the gestures of ceremony, right? And I'm talking about deep ceremony. I'm not talking about, like, just a wedding, but, like, if you think about some kind of ancient traditions of weddings, even, you can see them, you know, like, some people would say symbols, but again, I would go with Deloria around, I think it's around, these aren't symbols, this is really enactment. But but like, how can, like, and so creating, because one of the things that we need is each other, to restore culture that is not appropriative, okay? And anyway, and so that whatever, that's what we're going to be doing. We'll be ending in next summer in August, actually having created and built the tools for a year to hold a ceremony. And then that ceremony will be ushering in, hopefully, the new participants in the program. And probably after this first year, it's sort of like personal mastery in your family, as a mother and community. And then after that, I'll probably add a second year that has more to do with like becoming, I don't want to say practitioner, but like, yeah, but really offering this out into community. But who knows? I'm not promising that. Right now, I'm hoping to have a group of women that there will be reciprocity, so that I'm supported to really have the layers of support that I need in order to really hold this and carry this forward. So much I've been seeing this epiphany of like, I don't know, I was lucky that I attended some very real ceremonies pretty young. Not tons of them. I'm not like a diehard ceremonial anything, but I really experienced some things at different markers. And so something I realized recently is people really haven't, like sometimes I just get like kind of snarky and like bugged, like, oh, that's so dumb, like, it's dumb. But the more deeper place and the more compassionate place is like, oh my gosh, this is just so lost. And I was privileged enough to have some real ceremony that, for whatever reason, I'm called now to help people restore in a way that is going to not be like, ew, that's dumb. Like, but where we're going to really do something that is profound and authentic and connected, and it may not be what you think, or even what I think. So that's part of how it's going to be. So yeah, so where it is going to be like 2 months on and then a month off and then 2 months on and a month off. And we're going to be doing all kinds of different things, ranging from, really grounded things like food and earth medicine, i.e. herbalism or permaculture, and then all the way to this sort of trauma resolution. And we'll be creating the ceremony out of of resolved trauma. So in a past one, I think there's the word ancestral in it, I think, where I talk about intergenerational trauma and ancestral wisdom, and how there's these memes going around now that are about like, well, if we have intergenerational trauma, we must have intergenerational wisdom. And it's true, but there is a relationship between them. And a lot of our ancestral wisdom is tied up in unresolved trauma. And I think because of my ceremonial background and how I've looked out for other things, I've got this sort of toolkit or basket of medicines that I've discovered kind of by accident, that this process actually restores the gestures of the ceremonial gestures of healing. So, and that's sort of my mission. Like the world, we need to have our ceremonies of healing so we can stop fragmenting more and more and more. So there's a link. Let's see if I can do it right. I always do it wrong. Over there, I'm pointing away from where it is in front of me. There is a link to a write-up about the program, and so read it and get in touch with me if questions. There's a little wait list thing, and probably next week I'll be setting up times to go more into depth with people who kind of raise their hand and say, I want to know more about this. And it's something that I want to potentially participate in. So yeah, so I think that is a wrap. Are there any questions or comments or things like that? Maybe, I don't know, I maybe can add a link in here too for the Facebook group that we have. That's kind of, that's like totally free, and it's a place where we kind of talk about some of these things to a degree. So I'll pop that in the comments maybe as well, because maybe some of you want to join that. So, okay, so looks like no questions. Wondering if there's anything I've forgotten. I don't know. Okay, so I'm Krista. Thank you so much for coming, and I will be here again tomorrow with some or other topic if you have an idea or a question that might spur on the next topic. Otherwise, I'll go to my list that's been building. Okay, blessings to you all, and see you soon, hopefully.